Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon all of you. Continuing with our Muslim Neighbors program, and we had completed some of the stories and some of the events of the former prophets in the third chapter of the Quran, known as the chapter of Ali Imran, the family of Imran. The fourth chapter is known as the chapter of the women, Suratun Nisa. And significant that this whole chapter is named after the women. And in a time when women's rights are, highlighted everywhere and people are demanding those rights, well, Islam has actually established those rights 1400 years ago. And as this surah infers, it's not totally about women, but it highlights many issues that concern the women. It concerns the marriage issues concerning marriage, who we can marry, who we cannot, their rights. It deals with inheritance. It deals with a lot of social engineering issues, beautiful social engineering, now the day and age that we live in, human beings with their little intelligence are engineering things according to their greed and their desires and their wants, and what's in their personal or national best interests. But the creator of the universe engineers society in a way which is going to be the best possible, most equitous and most beneficial for everyone. All stratas of society, all genders and all peoples and all stratas. And so here we're going to look at some of these injunctions, and Surah An-Nisa is replete with many things, and we're just selecting some of the examples from that. The first thing we're going to talk about is inheritance. Now, we have a very elaborate legal code of inheritance in the West, but you'll find the courts full of disputes over inheritance. Because why? Because the basic premise is that it's my money and I do with it what I want. That's the premise of the materialists, those who have divorced themselves from the divine and the divine guidance. So it's my body, I do with it what I want. It's my money, I do with it what I want. It's my property, I do with it what I want. If I want, I bequeath it to my conventional heirs. If I want, I bequeath it, to my dog. If I want, I can just, squander it away. I can do whatever I want because I think it's mine. Well, as the whole theme of Islam is submission to the orders of the Creator, and that being that He is the Creator, everything else is a creation, as we've mentioned so many times. I am His creation, and also all the resources at my disposal, my wealth, which I consider my wealth. It is actually a trust which is placed in my hands. It doesn't really belong to me. It's been given to me by the Creator like everything else. So it's actually His property, and I will have to return it back to Him, at least return back the accountability to what I did with that property to Him. And so therefore, inheritance also, that which is left behind, of course, the most important inheritance for every human being is what he sends ahead. So what he spends in the way of God and what he spends in the way of Allah, that is actually his wealth that will continue with him forever and ever. Otherwise, the other portion of his wealth is what he's spent on himself, and that's finished. He will, of course, have to give account for that as well. And that which he leaves behind. And so leaving behind arbitrarily, you're going to end up with a lot of disputes because the heirs are going to, somebody's going to object. And that's usually the case. And the more money that is, the more dire those disputes become, and the more nasty they become. And we see the news, particularly you'll see the celebrities or the very wealthy. They leave behind and they give some outrageous sort of instructions for their wealth, the will in the Last Testament. And so the heirs don't accept that. They dispute. It goes on. It causes rancor. It causes animosity, it causes, cutting of relationships. So in Islam, that's not the case. In Islam, the case is that you have the the option or the discretion in up to 1/3, up to maximum 1/3 of your wealth you can bequeath in charitable causes or to whoever you like, but you cannot bequeath that 1/3 to the heirs, and the heirs are specified. And those basic heirs will be, number one, your children, number two, your spouse, and number three, your parents. So parents, children, spouse, they will inherit in any case. And specific amounts and portions are mentioned in the Quran concerning that. And if one doesn't have those, those close relationships, children, spouse, parents, then grandparents or grandchildren, or it can go to brothers and sisters and uncles and cousins, and as it expands out according to the closeness of relationship. And this is not something new in terms of divine revelation. We'll find also in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Jewish law also, there is laws of inheritance. The interesting thing is that what I can imagine, I'm not a scholar of the biblical traditions, but what I can gather is that in those traditions, those biblical traditions, the basic instruction is to leave the inheritance to the sons. In other words, if the sons are available, then the daughters do not inherit. Otherwise, if the sons are not available, then daughters in that case may inherit. At any rate, there is something akin to that, that there is specified heirs that are mentioned, in biblical law. However, in Islam, daughters will definitely inherit along with sons, and sisters may inherit also. Sisters and brothers also may inherit in certain circumstances. As I said, if children, parents, spouse, these three will inherit in any case. And the rules and regulations are basically mentioned in totality in a very amazing way in the Quran. And I'm going to read from that. Sometimes the portion will be designated as a percentage, and sometimes the portion will be the remaining balance, which is left after the percentage. So in this case, obviously in Islam, the wealth is not up to us to leave in just as we like, but rather it has to be distributed according to the laws of inheritance. And those laws of inheritance are mentioned here in the chapter of the women. And so I'll just read from this chapter and give a sort of a brief explanation and commentary on that. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يوصيكم الله في أولادكم للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين فإن كن نساء فوق اثنتين فلهن ثلثا ما ترك وإن كانت واحدة فلها النصف ولأبويه لكل واحد منهما الثلث مما ترك إن كان له ولد فإن لم يكن له ولد وورثه أبواه فلأمه الثلث فإن كان له إخوة فلأمه الثلث من بعد وصية يوصي بها أو دين آباؤكم وأبناؤكم لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا فريضة من الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما. We want to also highlight, before I mention this, the translation and a little bit of commentary here, we want to focus on two things. Number one, the brevity of this legislation. In a very few verses, the entirety of the rules and regulations in terms of percentages and portions is mentioned here, and in the ayats which are going to come thereafter. And interestingly, the science of algebra, which we're all aware of, but we were probably not aware of the origins of the science of algebra. The algebra comes from the Arabic word al-jabr, and al-jabr means to put something together or solve problems. It's and here it's meaning to solve mathematical equations where you have unknowns. And so the author of that basic discipline is a Muslim scholar by the name of Al-Khwarizmi. And last year, I happened to visit, his the place in which he taught. And actually, I visited the old institution, almost 500-600 years ago, where they used to teach. And so he developed this science called algebra, al-jabr in the Arabic language. And the main purpose was to solve these kind of problems. And he mentions the law of inheritance. It was used, first of all, to solve problems in the law of inheritance. The use of the unknowns, because we have various variables and unknowns in who is going to be allotted what. Those are unknowns, and they were solved by the science of algebra, and also calculating other things which are religiously connected. And if you see the book of Al-Jabr, it's a book of mathematics, but it's just like a book of Islamic jurisprudence or any other book which begins with the praise of Allah and the salutations of the Prophet Muhammad and explaining the purpose of the creation of mankind, and also the great favor of Allah, giving man knowledge of what he did not know, and then mathematics in general, and then specifically as algebra. So everything was connected, to the divine order. That was, what our tradition comes from. And so here also, and that's the first point. The second point is the fact that, as we've mentioned from time to time, the legislation mentioned in the Quran is not like a statutes, just a dry statutes being mentioned, order number 1, order number 2, statute 1, 2. Always, it begins with the mention of Allah and a motivation towards his obedience and reminder of our responsibility as his servants and slaves, and the very nature of our, existence and the purpose of our existence to live a life of servitude, and that be, in every facet of our life. And so here, the beginning of this legislature begins, Yusikumullahu. Allah gives you, the guidance, and He gives you the sort of advice on how to deal with the wealth that you leave behind. So again, mention of Allah and mentioning the name of Allah. So again, reminding us that it is Allah who has created us, who has given us the wealth. He has put it in our hands as a test and a trial, and we're going back to Him to give an account. And so therefore, we need to be very careful regarding all things wealth. So what wealth we're leaving behind, we want to ensure that it goes to its proper channels. And that being so, that squashes all of the, the discrepancies, because these are the laws. It's not from my side, it's not from my son's side or my wife's side, or they put pressure on me and so I, gave my will in their favor. No, it is, decided by Allah. So everyone will be content with that, provided we all have iman. If we all have faith, we're going to be content that Allah has decided who gets what. Right? And so here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He advises you according to your children, because they're generally the people who are the first to inherit and the most important of the inheritors, although others inherit with them as well. And so the injunctions regarding the children, both the male and the female children, and then also regarding the parents. And if there are children present, then how much do the parents get? And if the children are not present, there is no children, then the parents will receive a larger portion, etc. If brothers are present, then also the equation changes, and so forth and so on. And so in these very short, the very, it's a very succinct and very, very very brief account, in which it's less than a page of the Quran, that the entirety of the laws of inheritance are explained, and in detail. And generally, the laws of Islam are mentioned in a general sense in the Quran, and their details are generally, dealt with in the narrations and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In this case, in inheritance, all of the specifics, with very few exceptions, are mentioned in the Quranic verse itself. What is going to be given thereafter? What is going to be given to the spouses, both the husband and the wife? It's also designated here, and also injected, within that narrative. Again, the Quranic style, not simply, handing out dry laws, but rather motivational encouragement And warnings, divine encouragement and divine warnings are also, placed, before and after and within those injunctions themselves. And here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says a very important concept that we need to focus on. People generally, they give their will or they write out their will according to what they think will be best, for their own interests and the interest of those, who they're leaving behind, be it their children, be it their relatives, be it others who are not even related to them whatsoever in terms of blood relationship. So if one uses his own small human intelligence, so, there's going to be difficulties. And so here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that your parents or your children or any of your relations for that matter, you don't know who are more befitting for that inheritance and who actually will be more beneficial with that your wealth will be more beneficial in their hands than others. Allah knows best, and therefore He has prescribed in the best possible way. So with that cognizance, we surrender, our thinking and our opinions to the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it goes much better and it works out all the better, a win-win-win for all involved. We're going to take a short break and we'll come back with more divine social engineering. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we're continuing with the divine social engineering and the various injunctions that, create a harmonious and empathetic and sympathetic and loving and caring environment, within society. So we dealt with the laws of inheritance and, with inheritance being distributed in the way in which the creator of the universe has prescribed. It's going to be in the best interests of all, and it's going to create more harmony and more, social unity and harmony, for everyone in the family and within in the greater society. Here, we want to mention some of the verses that deal with the overall umbrella principle of financial transactions, and we talked about earlier in some of our earlier sessions about interest and usury, which is socially and economically and destructive in so many ways, and it's one of the greatest crimes. And it's also, by the way, one of the original 10 Commandments as well. So here we're going to look at what are equitable ways of transacting, the inequitable ways or the unfair and unjust ways of interest and usury, taking advantage. Rather, here we're going to look at how we can utilize the resources and transact with one another in a beneficial and harmonious way. And so here I will read the verse and then we'll translate and give a little discussion on this. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما ومن يفعل ذلك عدوانا وظلما فسوف نصليه نارا وكان ذلك على الله يسيرا إن تجتنبوا كبائر ما تنهون عنه نكفر عنهم سيئاتكم وندخلهم مدخلا كريما. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says something along these lines that, O people of Iman, again, the hallmark method of announcing, to the people of Iman, because obviously they're the ones who are going to pay heed and implement and who will benefit. O people of Iman, don't eat up your wealth. La ta'kulu, literally, don't eat up your wealth. In other words, don't consume, the wealth of one another, bil batili, in unjust ways. And we mentioned, that interest and usury and deception, cheating, fraud, etc., these are all absolutely forbidden in Islam. But rather, an taradim minkum. And these two, in fact, in this one word, taradi means in mutual agreement, and not merely mutual agreement, but mutual satisfaction. In other words, I'm satisfied, in my transaction, whether I'm the buyer or the seller, and you as buyer or seller are quite satisfied in your transaction. And as Islam has always, mentioned and highlighted, equity and empathy for everyone, and caring for one another, and one of the very important hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is from the very illustrious companion whose name was Jabir ibn Abdullah, Jabir the son of Abdullah. And he mentions that he pledged allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ with various conditions. Among those conditions was an-nus li kulli Muslim, to be sincere, sincere in one's intention towards each and every Muslim. And for that matter, for each and every human being, which we're going to see later on in some of the ayats which are going to come later on in our next episodes. And so as a result of that, he once bought a horse, had his agent buy a horse, which his agent paid 20 dinars for that horse. And it was quite equitable. The seller was happy. The buyer was obviously happy, even though the seller was using his agent. So when the horse was seen by Jabir, and he saw that this was an excellent horse, and he felt that that horse was actually worth more than what his agent paid for it. So he called the seller, and he said, were you content with selling your horse for 20 dinars to my? He said, yes, of course. He said, well, your horse is worth more than that. So why not, why not to 30? Well, why not even 40? He kept on raising the price. Ultimately, he agreed. Actually, Jabir, said, no, you should take more for your horse. He ended up giving him 70 or 80 dinars when the person was, he was content with 20. So 4 times, what he, the original agreed price was. Otherwise, we usually haggle to lower the price. And he is, contesting, the paid price to make it more. Why? Because he had that sincere, well-wishing in his heart for each and every person. Now, if we had a society that has that kind of belief and has that kind of well-wishing, what kind of a society would we have? Well, this is the kind of society that the Quranic instructions builds. And we had a model, and we do have enclaves that still, that embody that model. And I've seen in my travels, these injunctions being implemented and lived actually in practical life. And particularly during the time of the Prophet and thereafter, in those decades shortly thereafter, this was exactly the society of Medina. This is how Medina was. It was following these, these instructions. So, all you people who believe, do not consume your wealth among yourselves, except that it should be in equitable transactions, tijara, business transactions, buying and selling, on the basis of mutual, not only agreement, but mutual contentment with those transactions. And as we mentioned, if everyone has the well-wishing of the next, then we're going to actually materialize that. It's going to come to fruition. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. And also, the Quranic style is adding, relevant things along with it. So since we're talking about transactions and utilizing the resources, the most important, resource that we have is our own life. So وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do not kill yourselves. This is an order. It means literally, do not commit suicide, or don't kill yourselves. But it also means not only yourself, but not to kill anyone. Killing yourself or killing anyone else is all the same. It is all, the sin of the highest measure. Inna Allah kana bikum rahima. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very kind to you. Don't be unkind to yourselves or to others by taking life, which is, and is mentioned also in the Quran. The one who takes the human life is like the one who has taken the life of all of humanity. And the one who saves a life is like the one who saves the entirety of humanity. And again, legislature is not just, dry legislature. Motivation and warnings are given. And who does that? And who takes life, his own or any other, unjustly and in animosity and unjustly, then that person will be sent towards the fire of Jahannam, where he will definitely have to bear, the torture endlessly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us all from that. And that's quite easy for Allah to do. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, encapsulates, the entirety of proper behavior. In tajtanibu kaba'ira ma tunhauna anhu, nukaffir anhu sayyiatikum. If you will cease and desist and remain aloof from these major sins that you have been forbidden from, then we will overlook and we'll expedite and sort of, we'll sort of level off all of those sort of smaller sins that you might have been performing. And will enter you into a very noble entrance. And of course, the reference here is to the paradise. And here, also a very important principle, do not covet and do not envy such things that we have given to others. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala distributes his resources and wealth, etc., name, fame, and various things of this nature as he sees fit. And so don't covet that which has been, given to others, but rather see the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on you. And one of the umbrella, concepts also from the sayings of the Prophet is to look to those who are beneath you in terms of the worldly things. Do not look to those who are above you in terms of worldly things. And that would be more likely to keep you grateful, for the favors that Allah has given to you. And as regard religion, look to those who are higher than you and aspire to be like them. And don't see those less than you to think that you have achieved something magnanimous or you have really reached some high level in religion. So these are some of these social engineering concepts that if we will understand them, live them, and implement them, what a better life we will have, our families and society. And we'll continue with this in this strain in the next few episodes. And until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.